We're just going to introduce each other, first, and then we're going to dive into some questions. But if you all have any really pertinent burning questions about self-editing, I am also, just make sure to have those in your heads. If you have, if you prefer, to have us read questions aloud, you can submit your question, write it on a piece of paper, ferry it up to the panel, and I can also ask panelists that way as well. But yeah, so just keep in mind we will have, Q&A later for all those, burning queries you might have in the back of your mind. So to introduce, Howard, do you want to go first?
Certainly. Can everybody hear me? You cannot hear me at all?
Mike's wrong.
All right.
Wait, mine's on.
Hers is.
Sounds on.
There we go. That's on. Well, hi, I'm Howard, and let's see. I've written 4 Pathfinder novels, several series for St. Martin, starting with The Desert of Souls. I have a new series out from Bain, starting with Lord of a Shattered Land. Book 3 is coming out in October, and Book 2 is getting released in softcover here in, I guess another month or 2. And I've also got a lot of editing experience. I've edited for the University of Nebraska Press. I've edited for Goodman Games. I edited for Black Gate.
Hello. Okay, it's hard to, okay. Hi, I'm Katherine Monasterio. I am an editor of the developmental and copy editing and proofreading sort, and we can probably go over that at some point. But at the moment, I am editing for Battletech, Shadowrun, Gallant Knight Games, a bunch of their stuff, and everything else. So it's great.
Awesome. Just in time, Linda. Welcome, guest of honor, Linda Addison.
Are you all right?
It's so awesome.
Hi! Happy to be here. Sorry I'm late.
If you want to get settled in, I can do introductions for myself
I'm
first.
here. You do you.
All right. So, so do you want to introduce yourself then? And
Hi. I'm clumsy Lily Addison. Poet of the fantastic. Oh my God, I love this. I write poetry, fiction. Just jumped into novel land with science fiction and won a lot of awards.
And I am Diana Foe. My pronouns are she and her. I'm executive editor at Air Books. I've been publishing for over 15 years. Most notably at Tor for over a decade before, I hopped into podcasts and I hopped here. So I have editorial experience on a variety of levels, but I will really let our panelists speak more about self-editing. But if anyone has any particular questions about a role of beyond self-editing, I will happily step in to fulfill those questions as well. So as we get started, I think the title of the panel is pretty self-explanatory. Oh, no, thank you. Okay. So I think the title of the panel is pretty self-explanatory, but so I will start with asking, does self-editing, in your opinion, require multiple revisions or revision process? Do you each want to kind of talk through how you view self-editing?
Do you want to start?
Oh, whoever feels.
I can start.
All right, go for it.
Get over my shyness, working on it. Should I use the mic? Okay, because I sound really good on the mic. Anyway, I think it really depends on your process. For me, I like to write, as I've said before, I am the queen of the worst first drafts ever. I just want to get to the end of what I'm writing. Just need to get to the end. And that means there's a lot of stuff to fix. Some people I know edit as they write. As their imagination comes, they're editing. So when they go through, it's just one swoop through to fix it. I have to go through more than one time. Sometimes give the characters names, I'm just saying. And I also know my weaknesses with white room syndrome, talking heads. So for me, I usually have to go through this one time for each of the things I know I need to fix. The biggest thing I use is talking out loud, reading it out loud. And then I give it to my writers group, which I've been in since 1990. They always find stuff, no matter how hard I try, but I don't care because I need the work to be good. So the self-editing versus, other people editing is just like, it's all one process for me. But it always ends up good. So.
All right, I'll go next. For me, it's definitely, the process is for sure a process. It usually, when I'm editing myself, I consider a draft done when I've got like 90% of the text down and only some of those brackets that are like, fill in later because I just can't be bothered to bother with those at the moment. But once the gaps are filled in, then I try to do specific revisions for specific things. So like, here's a pass where I'm going to make sure that that all the beats are connected, and then here's a pass where I'm checking to make sure that I have the foreshadowing and like all the little trinkets that appear once and I want to have appear again, and like the bits. And then I'll do a pass that's like actually polishing the prose and like making sure that it's not making sure that it's pretty the way that I want it to be, and that can last several drafts. But yeah.
Over the years, I developed a process that works for me. I don't know how much it would work for other people, but I hate being stuck when I'm drafting. So once I get a working thumbnail, then I will almost write a bad screenplay. Dialogue comes easier for me than other things. So once I know my characters, I kind of dialogue it all out. And then if I have an idea for what's happening in the scene, I might write a couple of descriptions, almost like stage play directions. And then one of the things I don't want to slow down for is how the battle's going to work. So I will figure out beat by beat how the battle's going to work. But this is all sort of just, it's not very pretty. Occasionally a simile or a metaphor might occur to me while I'm doing this out, but mostly it's like a bad screenplay. So that's my rough draft. When I come back through, and I typically write longhand because I spend too much time staring at a glowing screen already. So as I type it in, I'm already fixing it. But sometimes I just get everything off of the page into the computer, and then I start to play, and that's when I really begin the first editorial pass. I am lucky enough to be married to an amazing lady who's brilliant, and she's a physician, so she has no business being a good developmental editor. But she is one of the best editors I've ever worked with. I trust her judgment and her idea and even her grasp of character.
That's handy.
Yes.
I just wanted to add, finding someone that you can trust to give you an honest opinion on the sense of the rhythm, the energy in the story is so important. One of my best ones is an artist. And I can always like throw something at her when I think I've done it as well as I can and get some great feedback, because she's a reader, but she's apparently very good with grammar and stuff. So, yeah.
I wanted to throw out there really quick also that what you were talking about with like starting kind of almost from a script format, I've heard people, maybe it's not the same thing, but I've heard people refer to zero drafts, where you it's basically one step above an outline kind of, where you actually have some beats and some dialogue and like some description.
Yeah, I sometimes call mine a scaffolding draft.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's like the same concept, but that can be, I have a couple of friends who that's really helpful for when they're first starting out. It's just, getting that slightly more than an outline, but not quite like the draft down.
And I think all of what we're saying is what the difference is between finishing something, because you gotta finish it, to edit it, to publish it. And a lot of times what stops people is just getting to the end because of some of the things that we've all used to break that up.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really smart to like hear how each of you guys like talk about writing as a process that is really, it sounds like you're just pulling parts together, like pieces of a puzzle, and like kind of assembling them, and then even before you're thinking about the revision process, but you're also including that as part of the active revision process. So I think that's really interesting, about how the simple act of like writing and processing the storytelling stuff really does go hand in hand in like how you construct the overall picture of the final piece. So that's really cool to hear. And given that, I know that there are writers that, if they had all the time in the world, will take all the time in the world and constantly revise. So when do you think is the right time to let a story go and start showing to other people?
It has to be mostly working before I want to show it to. I've got not just my amazing wife, I have an amazing son. I also have an amazing daughter, but she doesn't read. Read for fun. But I've got my wife and my son and another trusted core of readers that I've developed over the years. But I don't want them to look at it until I feel like it's mostly working, until I've gotten the stuff that feels like I know I need to get. Now I might show it to them if I've got a knot that I'm not sure how to. I might not tell them what I'm thinking or that there is a knot, but I might leave the knot there waiting to see what their reaction is. But I want it to be mostly functional before I share it.
That makes sense. I'm kind of similar. I think the process that I described kind of looks at macro to micro, right? You've got the big stuff where you need to fill in those gaps. You need to make sure the arcs work, the structure works. But about the time when I'm getting into the proofreading, copy editing phase, and I'm literally just sitting there doing multiple passes where I'm trying to polish, is this the right verb for this one sentence that's, 0.0% of the novel? At that point, I'm like, okay, I think someone needs to just take it out of my hands. Alternatively, the other point when I know it's time to give it to someone is when I'm sick of looking at it. I've just had it for too long, and I'm like, I can't edit another sentence, or my brain is just going to implode.
Our processes sound very similar.
Yeah.
For me, early on when I was writing, one of the things I realized is that I was editing and then I'd go back and edit and then I edited back to what it was and I thought, oh, okay, this is a problem. So I don't do that. I try not to do that anymore. I pretty much kind of do the same thing that you're saying, and that is I get it in the best possible shape. And the way I know that is I read it at the end. I read it in the beginning to figure out what's awkward, what's missing, what doesn't sound right, what's...
Now you're reading it out loud.
Out loud, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I meant to say that.
I am
Thank
fully
you.
committed to that. I read it out loud multiple times.
Because sometimes you can hear in your voice when something is awkward or it doesn't come together or it's not in the right time and tense and so forth. But then there's a point, like you've all mentioned, that I just don't know what else to do. I can't do anymore. And that's when I turn it over. As part of being the queen of the worst drafts, I've given my writers group stories where it's like, and something really bad happens. Moving on. Because I just feel stuck. And since I have to get to the end or I just will give up. I will give that to the writers group and say, not sure what happens here. Something bad. I think it happens to this person. And just in getting it out of my hands helps to loosen up my need to try to force, because I don't believe in forcing work. If it's not coming, then it's not ready to come. You should go do something else. Garden or write something else.
Yeah, and out of all your answers, it gives you the impression that writing, even though it's stereotyped as a very, solitary practice, is really collaborative. And having other voices and inputs and thoughts really kind of jar that creative process further. So I really like hearing all those answers. And I also too, as an editor, with a theater background, I also thought is it weird to tell people to read their stuff out loud? Because I'm so used to table reads with playwrights or workshops where all the actors are reading stuff out loud, but it really does work across multiple mediums that way. So So I'm really glad that you guys also mentioned that.
Yeah, it really shakes out. So word echo, where you use the same word too many times on the same page, or you've accidentally rhymed something.
Yeah.
That you didn't mean to.
You didn't mean to put the rhyme in there,
100%.
right?
I also want to throw out there, in terms of reading aloud, if you're not in a space where you're able to read it like literally out loud, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Word has a read aloud function, and there is nothing like hearing your prose in that weird robot voice to get you to see it or hear it rather from a different angle. It is bonkers, and it has really helped me catch a number of errors a lot of times. So highly recommend. You can choose your voice, you can choose the speed at which it reads. It's kind of surreal.
And it's interesting because having that different process, stuff leaps out more easily than it does if you're just reading it not out loud. And you'll notice also repeated phrases or terms or favorite words.
One of the aspects I enjoy when you have the read aloud process is that you can tell which characters start sounding like the internal narrative or start sounding like the author, and not actually being in character. And it's hard to see when you're just writing it and you're like in the flow, and then you realize, wait, this character is talking the same sentence structure as this other character's thinking like 2 chapters ago. That was, that's like the default writer's voice, right? And it's hard to root out unless you have a chance to kind of look at it outside of the page.
And that's why I do editing in layers. I will literally go through just for the dialogue, for the syntax to make sure it's right, and also for what you're saying that the voices don't all sound the same. I've gone through for just comments, because that's like my kryptonite. I don't want my but you know what? You kind of gotta.
And there's also an idea, and this is kind of going more into the next steps process, perhaps, like after you feel like your book is complete as it can be. But there's an idea lately that a novel would need to be edited by a freelance editor before even shopping it around for an agent. I obviously have my own thoughts, but I'm really interested in what writers think of that.
You want to start?
I'd love to start.
Go.
Sure. Well, as an editor, I will say that hang on, where do I start with this? First of all, I'm against, in principle, I'm against the idea unless you're going the self-publishing route. If you're going self-publishing, there needs to be some kind of editor involved before it goes online. But if you're trying to go the traditional publishing route to get an agent, as long as your structure is pretty good, your character arc is pretty good, as long as you've got the elements in place, they will have someone who can edit it for you. So I don't necessarily think, unless you really, really, really want to spend the money, I don't think it's necessary.
I'm going to completely agree with Katherine. Because of my own editorial background, I had all this editorial experience before I finally got my first novel contracts. I bring a whole lot of editorial experience to the table already. And then I am fortunate enough to be married to this amazing lady, as I mentioned, who happens to be also an excellent editor. So I have a real leg up when I'm submitting things. So I don't know that I'm a great expert on how you normally do it. But it sounds like she has a wonderful perspective. Listen to her.
Oh,
And for something different. So, as I mentioned, I'm in a writer's group, Circles in the Hair, or Sith, don't ask. Or ask me over a glass of wine. Anyway, wow. So, I use the group when I'm doing stories and fiction, and there's only one person in the group that does poetry that can give me feedback, but I've been doing it so long, I kind of can just send it out, and then if there's something, a little tweak, the editor of the magazine or anthology will give me that information, and I'll make the change if it makes sense. But for my first novel, which I finished, well, I finished a lot of novels, but let's not talk about those. The one that I finished last year that I went to get an agent for, I paid one of the members of our group who is an actual editor to go through it because I wanted it to be as clean as possible. And I got it back, 100,000 words, I got it back with like, I think 7,000 change tracking notes. And I was like, thank you, because I knew it needed help. And it weren't with the story, the characters development, it was like I said, talking heads, tenses, commas, oh. And so when I went through all of them, making, as I always do, a list of things to try to avoid next time. And I took about 99% of what was suggested. 1% was just not my voice. It wasn't my rhythm. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna leave that. Then I went to get an agent. And I sent it out, the one-page synopsis, and then I sent the whole thing to the agent I now have. And when we met on Facebook, FaceTime to like interview each other, my first question was, do you have any editorial feedback? And he said, this is so clean. And I was like, give me that award. I won the This Is So Clean award. Because I am the queen of the worst. Anyway, not in the end, but you know, the beginning. So for me, it worked very well. And he's been sending it out, and he's getting that same feedback from other publishers that there's really nothing they want to do, and that which never happens, by the way. So, but they do have ways of doing it if you do send it in without that. But I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, and I also want to express that it's always like an individual choice about how your own comfort level, your own personal plans for the book, the intentions behind it, your own like financial, resources. If you do choose to ask for, any paid services, but in general, the idea I do want to also highlight is that money should flow to an author, and I don't want, any, thoughts about whether to ask for freelance services or editorial services to be confused with, scams or predatory practices, of people out there saying, oh, you pay me this money and I can get you published because I have editorial experience. There's a legitimate way to ask for freelance editorial work if you want for your writing, and there are a lot of red flags or bad business practices out there too. So I always recommend this resource from SNFWA called Writers Beware.
Oh yeah.
So if you're not familiar with it, just write it down. You can easily Google it. Our search term, because Google is unreliable now, I guess. And it's a website. It's run by Victoria Strauss. It's very informative, not just about who's actually like a scam or a vanity press or an illegitimate, operation, but also stuff about like contracts that would be good for authors to learn about, or publishing news that would be good for authors to be aware of. So it's just in general a very, very great resource, and I always recommend it.
And that's not, I think you can get to that if you're not a member of SNFWA.
Yeah.
It's like you can just go and have that resource. The other thing I wanted to say I do agree with is that if you are self-editing, please, for the sake of all the goddesses, get someone you trust to go through and make sure that everything is in place. Because if you do send it to an editor or a publisher or an agent, they have staff that will do that. But I wouldn't trust myself to do it. I'm just saying.
But speaking about different types of editing, another that I want to touch base upon, you may have heard of it. It's called getting a sensitivity reader or a cultural consultant for your work. So how would that element play into the self-editing process?
To me, I'll start it. To me, if you're getting a sensitivity reader, your work should be as clean as possible, so they're not being like more or less giving them the basics of what it is. It shouldn't be a first draft unless you're one of these people who I do know There are people whose first drafts are pretty good because they've already been doing the rewriting before they start writing. I think it really depends on how comfortable you are that you are not doing a cliche with something you're not familiar with. I'll give you an example. I wrote a story for an anthology that had the main character in a wheelchair. I don't know anything about being in a wheelchair. What I did is I went to blogs of people in wheelchairs to understand their point of view. Because if you're not in a wheelchair, a lot of people they've got to be obsessed with wanting to walk. Well, you don't know that. And so when I went to blogs written by people in wheelchairs, you understand they have things in their life that are not just obsessed on that one thing. The main character had to be in a fight. So I went on YouTube and looked up fighting in wheelchairs and got some really great advice on how to write that. I also went to a YouTube video on how to move in a wheelchair for the first time, like how to navigate it. And my chair in my office is on wheels. The reason I did this is what I call due diligence, to make sure, again, that you're not just clicheing someone, or you're not just going off of what you think motivations might be for what they're doing, but to really understand, without making it a lifelong study, of what life is for that person and what their challenges are. Because I had a great fight scene in a wheelchair. I was like, yeah. If I'd had more time, I would have had someone in a wheelchair read it, but I was under a really tight deadline, so I was just, like I said, I did a lot of research. So I think if it's something you're not used to, like you didn't grow up with, you don't have family, you don't have friends, it's worth it if you're writing way outside of something that you're very familiar to get someone. You don't necessarily have to pay. I mean, you know people, right? You need somebody to sensitively write for clumsiness on your
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And assuming you're not under a deadline, I would definitely recommend doing it, especially if the perspective in your novel is one that you just, don't have, whether that's, of ability, cultural, everything else. I think if you have more minor points, as long as you're doing the due diligence and the research and everything else, then you could probably, if you're going the trad club route, rely on that house's editors to slap you on the wrist and fix things if you happen to get something wrong. But especially if your story is from a perspective that you do not personally have experience with, sensitivity readers are worth their weight in gold, and I highly suggest ditching out for one.
I am in complete agreement with both Linda and Katherine. I don't think there's anything more I can add. That was very well said.
And I'll just quick, one example. I read a friend's novel, sci-fi, and the main character was a black woman, and she did something like go out in the rain and with hair. No, we don't do that. Okay. Just like, we just finished doing our hair and you're out in the rain without an umbrella. No, it's a small thing that most people would probably not even notice. But if I'm reading the book, it throws me out because I'm like, is that a wig? Or what? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is happening? So it's just little things sometimes that you just don't even realize.
Yeah, so thank you for all these answers. And also, and if you're also curious, most publishing houses, do have resources to also cover for sensitivity readers. So I have been in situations where the manuscript has been sensitivity read or perhaps has not. And I would recommend, internally, hey, there are some elements that I would like to get a reader on. If we decide to acquire the project, that is something that we fit into the editorial process of the book to make sure that that is covered. So, so in case you all have any question about that, but that policy does vary from house to house. And I can't say if all publishers have that same mindset.
And I wanted to add, you're not going to please everybody no matter how hard you work at it. I work really hard to make sure that my female voices are authentic. One of the reasons I show it to my sister and my wife and other female friends is because I want the women to sound authentic. And I remember a couple of years ago, there was a review that said, oh, I don't like the way he writes his female characters. And I'm thinking, oh, well, then you're not going to like my sisters or my wife or my mother, because that's, the way I write my female characters is based on various aspects of their personalities I've seen over the years. Okay, well, you're not going to win every battle no matter how hard you try.
But the due diligence, to me, is very important.
Yes.
Don't just assume you know what it's like to be as clumsy as me. So anyway.
So I have one more question before we have some time for Q&A. So again, if anyone has any specific questions you want the panel to ask, you have the option of raising your hand, speaking out loud during that section, or if you'd rather write your question on a piece of paper and pass it forward, I can read out loud as well. So just keep that in mind as we talk about my last, pre-planned question here, which is, what are some resources that you suggest to learn more about self-editing? And what about if you choose to find a freelance editor, what are some resources for that as well?
Can I go first? Yeah. Because I only really have one thing. Besides the fact that if you're getting an editor, you should get someone that was recommended that had used them. The one I used from my writers group, I've recommended easily to other people, and he's done a great job with them. So our writers group, when we got together in 1990, came across something called the Critiquer's Checklist by Grace Ackerman. Ackerman, Grace. Give me grace. And we have used that since then, and I use it quite often. And the reason being, I have it on my phone. The reason being that she breaks down how to look at a piece by what storyline pitfalls you can run into, what character, setting, dialogue, details, and mechanics. And it's a really good checklist. We use it as a writer's group as far as understanding if you're giving someone feedback, these are the kind of things you want to look at. And she actually goes into I'll just read the first things. Storyline, what is the story saying? Is it clear? And things like that. Questions that you can ask about your own work, and if you're in a writer's group, questions that you can ask and answer when you're giving feedback. That's all.
Fabulous. Yeah.
Where was this information?
It's online.
How do I find it?
Just look up Critiquers, and it's spelled, I think this may be like an English spelling, or I'm just ignorant. CRITIQUER, checklist by Grace Ackerman.
How do you spell Ackerman?
Ackerman. Or if you have an iPhone, catch me later and we can exchange.
I have a couple of resources. I got my start editing before I worked for Catalyst and everything on a site called Upwork, and a similar one is Fiverr with 2 R's at the end. There you will find a lot of editors who are very affordable, almost criminally affordable. If you like their work, tip them, please. I'm begging you. But also, if you are looking for a freelance editor, I always recommend, for the safety of the writer and for the safety of the editor, first of all, be super clear about what kind of edit you're looking for, whether it's just a structural, developmental edit, and you want them to look at the story overall, the character arcs, the structural beats, versus, do you just want to proofread? Is it ready to go and you just need somebody to iron out, the misspellings or the misplaced commas or whatever else? I also recommend that before you start work, and hopefully you can make this a paid arrangement, start with only sending your editor a chapter at a time, or just one chapter, so that you can get them to do it for you and make sure that you like their style. Because there's nothing worse than sending 100,000 words and paying a lot of money and then getting it back and realizing that everything they're telling you is stuff that you were not in for. They're like, change this whole character, and you're like, I can't do that. So it's good to start. If you can pay them for that, that's great, because nobody should have to work for free. But if it could just be a small percent of whatever the original agreed upon price is, that would be fabulous. But yeah, sending in a chapter to do that will save everybody a lot of struggle.
Could you spell out those first
Yeah,
two?
sure. Okay, Upwork is the first one, UPWORK, and then Fiverr is the other one, FIVERR.
Well, for obvious reasons, I haven't used a freelance editor, so I can't speak with a lot of expertise about that, so I'm not even going to try. I think we've gotten some great suggestions for editorial tools here. I would like to offer more of a global editorial tool for the writing process. That's Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. And I found that the reason that there's so many writing books out there is because there's so many different ways up the mountain, and there's so many different tools and techniques to get up there. But I found Pressfield's a little more universal than many of them. It's about the battle of the creative battle, and overcoming the resistance to not wanting to write. And it was a window into helping me shape my process. So maybe not a line-by-line kind of editorial thinking, but a way to think about your approach, which is also important as you're building your process.
Yeah, and some recommendations that I have in terms of self-editing. You know, there's a book that is very straightforward. You know, kind of like a workman-like, you know, explanation, which I think is a really great starting point for people. It's called Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, very upfront, and it's by Rennie Brown. Rennie is spelled R-E-N-N-I-E, and Brown is spelled B-R-O-W-N-E, and the set co-author is David King, and it's spelled how it sounds. You know, so I highly recommend that not just for like newer writers, but writers of all levels, because I love refreshers. I also, you know, recommend if you're looking for a writing book that kind of explores more about breaking the story, like what does it mean to have a character arc, what does it mean to break down plot beats in a larger structural sense. A couple of books I always love to recommend. One is called Story Genius by Lisa Cron. Lisa spelled L-I-S-A, Cron spelled C-R-O-N. You know, I also, recommend another book, and it's a book that is kind of like a 301 level sort of craft book, because it takes all of like our understanding of like concepts you might learn in the writing workshop and takes it in explains another direction, specifically for marginalized and historically underrepresented writers, you know, in a way that, and so half the book is those explanations of like terms like pacing, plot, voice, and dialogue in a totally different concept that blew my mind, every single paragraph. And then the second half of the book is different workshop exercises, which I think is perfectly valid for like writers looking to self-revise, to look at their book in a different way, but also if you are part of a writing group and you want to introduce these exercises, I think they're very helpful. It's called Craft in the Real World. Yes. There we go. There we go.
Yes.
And it's by Matthew Salezes. So Matthew spelled like it sounds, and Salezes spelled S-A-L-E-S-S-E-S.
Wow.
It's really, that one's really great.
Yes, great. We have 10 minutes. So 10 minutes. We're going to spend about 8 minutes of those on any Q&A, and then we're going to wrap. Yes.
As I write, I often find that I'm trying to flesh things out, and I write very quickly at first and very loosely, but then within a few pages I get more and more detail and self-editing and going back over word choices and things. How do you avoid that and like push on so you can keep writing the whole story?
Let me know when you find out.
I don't know that it's a bad thing unless it's stopping you from finishing the work. That may be your process.
Yeah, whatever, as long as you get to the top of the mountain, you maybe that's how you need to get there.
Can you? Or is that the problem?
I mean, it's kind of the problem, yeah, is that I get boiled down. I'm like, wow, now I'm writing every single character thought, whereas in the beginning I was just trying to write what was happening.
Well, why don't you try and slow down and scaffold a little bit and see if that does it. Try my method and see if that'll get you there so you don't get bogged down in the minute details until you get it all figured out. Yeah, bad screenplay.
I love that. And also, because I've made my career mostly on collections, I'm just trying to get as many tools in my toolbox on novel writing. And I've been playing with the snowflake method. And you can find that online. It's levels where you're kind of building a simple thing and you build it out. I mean, I'm not going to spend 5 days on 5 pages writing a character's thing, but you can use it as much as you want, but it allows you to start with, it's almost not an outline, because I'm a pantser, and this is killing me. Literally, my agent, I love him. He's like, could you send me another? I was like, oh my God, I don't know how it's going to end, but anyway, I figure it out. I make it up. But I mean, so the snowflake method, you're building the novel out with more detail, and you start with core characters, subplot. And that has helped me stop feeling like I'm going to get lost before I can finish it.
Yes?
A concept when I first started writing that I didn't really think existed was writing yourself into a corner. I didn't understand how an author could do that until I did it. And I was wondering if you guys have any insight on how you escape that trap once you're there.
Well, absolutely. That's why I developed that scaffolding system, because I get to play as I'm building the scaffold, and if it doesn't work, then I haven't poured tons of effort into writing all these beautiful descriptions that I'm going to have to just toss in the waste bin. And I learned this the hard way. So my first contract from St. Martin's was Desert of Souls. I got that. The book was already completed. I sent it off to them. So I mean, there were a few editorial changes, but it was done. So then they gave me a contract for another one, which wasn't written yet. And I thought all I needed was a loose outline, because that's what it had on book 1. And I wrote myself into a corner twice, all the way through that book. So I'd write the entire novel. I had to stop and start over. And that's why I developed this method, so I would not write myself into a corner. I can experiment in the rough draft stage. I can even pants a little bit as I'm figuring out how the scaffold's going to work. So I don't know if it'll work for you, but it saved me.
The versions of scaffolding, I love this idea, because a tip that I got from Weston Oakes, who has written a lot of novels. I don't know if anyone is aware of his work, but he's done so much work. Where he passed away last year, and he was a good friend of mine. And I was on his Patreon, and sometimes I would grab things that he had out there that were just really useful. So writing these synopses for a pantser made me want to go into the witness protection program. So I was like, But then I went to one of the things I pulled down from him, and what he said was, list the characters. Okay, so you have an idea, right? You have an idea of this character. I may not give them names, but I know what they're supposed to be doing. And then for each character, what is their subplot and the idea that you have? And by the time I did, I had a synopsis due. By the time I did that in 2 days, I had the synopsis, even though, it's like, yeah, that might happen at the end. Because by doing the characters and the subplot, I started to, and I always believe in writing in the super subconscious anyway, so then it's like, well, you gave me characters, I think this is what's going to happen. And by the time you figured out the subplots and whether or not they really should be in there, you kind of got a beginning, middle, end. And it doesn't take that long, so.
Agreed. Yeah, everything is great. I just want to add on to there that one of the things that made the biggest difference in when I write stuff is knowing the end before you start. And I know that's not great, especially for the pantsers among us. But also, if you do the scaffolding method, or if you even outline, it'll help you know the end of each chapter before you start. And then, when you actually know where everything's going, that should help guide you out of those corners. But
Yeah.
it is hard and it does suck. So.
Now we have time for one more question. Ideally, is anyone this side of the room? Yes?
So, when you're doing more of the developmental editing, how do you what process do you go through to as the phrases get kicked around online, kill your darlings. How do you decide like what darlings need to be killed?
Don't do it. Don't kill them. Keep them. But also do the thing where you look to see, are your darlings actually doing something for the plot, whether it's the theme, whether it's a character arc, or whether it is the literal action of the plot. But also, if you love it, if you're in the middle of a scene and you're like, I love this, this is everything I wanted to write, your reader's probably going to love it too. So as long as it's not full of darlings that don't do anything, I mean, keep it. Execute it.
I believe in keeping versions of stories, and just like take that baby out and see how it reads. If the energy reads, if it's moving along, then maybe that darling needs to be in a different book. So because with computers you can do that. You can take it out and see, how's this moving?
Yeah, I agree. The ones that I usually eliminate are if the pacing is off. If everything's moving along in a good clip, and all of a sudden my darling's entered, it just slows down for no good reason that doesn't help the plot. Out it goes, probably into a separate file that I'll forget about, but it's still there in case I need it. Yeah, right?
So you're just like temporary, like, cryogenically freezing your darling. That's what you're calling it.
Like a timeout, like a timeout thing, so.
Great. So we are going to wrap our panel. Thank you so much for being here. Panelists like to quickly say where people can find them, either at the con or online.
Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm at howardandrewjones.com, and I used to blog there regularly about writing techniques and craft. So if you want to pop over there anytime, I have lots and lots of articles on writing craft. My books are available nationwide. I'm going to be on multiple panels throughout the convention, and I have a signing at 4 tomorrow where you can come and hang out with me in the exhibit hall. And I love talking writing craft. If you ever want to drop me a line via my website.
You can find me pretty much nowhere online that I'll say in public, but you can find me, I love fan fiction, but you can find me around the thing. I have a whole bunch of workshops coming up. The big one tomorrow is Punch Up Your Prose, How to Craft Knockout Syntax. It's at 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's 2 hours. Bring something to edit. We're going to have a lot of fun with words because I love words and I'm going to subject you all to it. Also, either today or tomorrow, I have a novella coming out with Shadowrun. It's called, that's so nice. And it's called The Rules of the Kaido Club, and it's about sapphic street racing, and I'm really hyped about it.
Oh my God, I want that. So I'm doing a lot of stuff too, the next couple of days. Anyway, but what I would love to ask you to come to is Saturday at 5, the open mic that I'm hosting with Brandon O'Brien. Talk about some fun times. Just come. And you can find me on LindaAddisonWriter.com. My stuff's out there everywhere.
Great. Yes, and you can find me online at Diana M as in mushroom, Faux, spelled P as in penguin, H as in horse, O as in ostrich.com. You can find Air One Books at AirOneBooks.com. I'm also doing 4 other panels. So if you want to pick my brain on anything, because I love talking about stuff, there's Ask the Editor for Friday at 11 a.m. And then Friday at 4, I'm with Linda again, I think.
Yeah,
I'm Write What You Don't Know. Yes. So, and that's it. We're just hanging out all weekend. Yeah. So that is Friday at 4 is Write What You Don't Know, writing across cultural lines. On Saturday at 11, if you want to learn how to be an editor, you can pick my brain about that too. That is Saturday at 11. And Saturday at 4, I'm going to talk about AI and publishing. That is actually sold out, but maybe you can sneak in. Who knows? So thank you all again, and thank you to the con.